Have you ever been replaced by the very people you built your world around? Not forgotten, that would have been easier, but replaced, like an old chair someone puts out on the curb, hoping the garbage truck takes it away before the rain comes. I ask because I've lived long enough to know silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's the sound of someone rebuilding what others destroyed. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. If you don't mind me asking, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? I just like knowing who's on the other side of this quiet room, who's sharing this silence with me. My name is Norma Jenkins, and once I was a woman everyone depended on until I became the woman no one wanted around. I wasn't born weak, but I learned how to shrink myself so everyone else could fit. My mother used to say, Norma, when a woman holds a family together, she becomes invisible, because people only notice her when she lets go. And I believed that. I thought if I cooked right, smiled right, raised my children right, my world would stay safe. In the beginning, I was bright, not in the college degree way, but in spirit. I had dreams of starting my own bookkeeping business, maybe something small, helping locals with taxes and little accounts. But Harold, my husband, had other plans. He was charming, ambitious, and always perfectly dressed. People loved his confidence. I loved it too at first, until I realized his confidence needed silence to survive. My silence. He'd come home late, smelling of expensive cigars and faint perfume that wasn't mine. And when I asked where he'd been, he'd say, Norma, don't start. You wouldn't understand the business world. I used to think he was right. I used to think I didn't belong in that world, until I realized he'd just built it high enough to keep me looking up at him. We had 2 children, Lauren and Tom. Lauren was always close to her father, admiring his power, his social grace, his connections. Tom, he was softer, more like me, but even he grew distant once he moved abroad. Years passed in a blur of PTA meetings, quiet dinners, and pretending everything was fine. That's the hardest part about being a wife who holds everything together. You start to believe the illusion yourself, but illusions have cracks. Mine started one autumn evening. Harold was hosting an office dinner at our home. The house smelled of roasted lamb and expensive wine. I wore a pale blue dress, one I thought made me look graceful. I remember catching Lauren whispering something to her friend, both of them giggling softly. I pretended not to notice. After dinner, as everyone left, Harold stayed in the hallway, looking at me with that cold, assessing stare I'd grown to fear. He said, You embarrassed me tonight. I froze. What did I do? He poured himself another drink. You don't fit in anymore, Norma. You make people uncomfortable. You don't talk like them. You don't dress like them. I've tried to help you, but you're holding me back. There it was. The sentence that changes the air in a room forever. I thought he was just angry, maybe stressed. But days later, he packed my clothes in 2 small suitcases and told me to stay with my cousin for a while. That while became forever. Lauren visited once in the first month, brought me a small basket of fruit and a polite smile. I knew that smile. It said, Mom, I love you, but please don't make things harder. Tom called from overseas, promised to come back soon, but never did. I understood careers, families, life. Everyone moves forward. Everyone but me. I stayed in a rented apartment on the quiet edge of town, surrounded by the echoes of my own choices. I'd look out the window at families walking their dogs, mothers holding children's hands, and wonder if I'd done something terrible to deserve my loneliness. The day Harold remarried, I found out through Lauren's social media post. A perfect photograph, elegant garden, white dress, champagne. The caption said, new beginnings for them. Silence for me, and that silence, it grew heavy. I stopped answering calls. I stopped cooking for one. I stopped opening curtains until one day I simply forgot who I was. They said it was early cognitive decline, memory lapses, confusion. The doctors recommended a care home. Just for a few weeks, they said. Lauren signed the papers. That's how I ended up at Maplewood Care Center, the kind of place that smells faintly of bleach and old coffee. A place where days melt into each other and time loses its edge. But sometimes, destiny hides in the plainest places. Her name was Amelia Clark, one of the nurses. She couldn't have been more than 28, always humming softly, always patient, always making sure no one felt invisible. She'd talk to me even when I couldn't remember half of what she said. Once, she brought me tea and asked, "Mrs. Jenkins, do you ever miss the sound of your own voice?" I smiled, even though I didn't understand why she'd asked. But that night, lying in bed, I kept thinking about her question, the sound of my own voice. I hadn't heard it in years. I'd spent so long whispering around other people's comfort that even my thoughts had learned to tiptoe. Amelia would sit with me in the afternoons. Sometimes she'd ask me about my favorite foods, my favorite places, my childhood. And slowly, like dust clearing from an old piano, the memories returned. My first dance, the house we built, the garden I planted with my own hands. Then one morning, I woke up and something felt different. My hands weren't trembling. My head wasn't foggy. When Amelia came in, I said, "I want to go outside today." She smiled. "You sure? It's a bit chilly." "I've been cold for years, dear. I'll manage." She wrapped me in a coat, and we walked out to the courtyard. The sunlight felt like it was touching my bones for the first time in ages. That's when I decided I wasn't done yet. Maybe my family thought I was too far gone to find my way back. Maybe they thought memory loss was the end of the road. But the truth? It was just the clearing of noise, so I could finally hear myself again. Over the next weeks, Amelia started helping me with little exercises. Reading, writing, small accounting puzzles. She said it was good for the mind. But I think she knew it was healing something deeper. I could feel strength returning. Quietly, like the tide creeping back after a storm. Then one evening, she brought me an old newspaper from her bag. "Look," she said, pointing at an article. It was about a local charity gala, hosted by the Reeds, Lauren and Mark Reed, my daughter and son-in-law. I looked at the photograph, Lauren, smiling beside her husband, both of them standing in front of a banner that read, "Family First Foundation." The irony almost made me laugh. Amelia watched my face. "Do you know them?" I folded the paper slowly. Once upon a time, they knew me. That night, as I sat by my window at the care home, watching the moonlight fall across the floor, I whispered to myself, "They replaced me with strangers." But maybe destiny isn't done yet, and I didn't know it then. But fate was already pulling up a chair at the same table they once denied me. Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people who once depended on you? It's strange how the same hands you once fed, the same hearts you once nurtured, can one day pass by as if you were air. Thank you for staying with me tonight. And if you're still here, listening quietly from somewhere far away, may I ask, where are you joining from? And what time is it there? Because tonight, in my world, time feels softer, slower, as if it's giving me a second chance to speak the words I once swallowed. After my children replaced me with strangers, I disappeared for a while, not out of defeat, but because grief demands silence. I rented a small room in the back of a church, the kind where light filters through stained glass, painting the walls in colors no one notices anymore. People would come to pray. I would come to breathe. For the first few weeks, I moved through life like a shadow, half alive, half remembering. The world outside went on, traffic, laughter, rain. But inside me, everything was still. Until one morning, I saw a flyer on the church's bulletin board. It read, "Community support needed. Women's Foundation expanding. Volunteers welcome." I don't know why, but those words felt like a whisper from my old self. The woman who once believed in care, structure, and home. I tore the flyer off gently and folded it in my pocket. That small act, folding paper, felt like the first decision I'd made for myself in years. When I walked into the foundation's small office 2 days later, it smelled like coffee and paper dreams. A woman named Clara greeted me. She had soft eyes and sleeves rolled up to her elbows, the kind of person who looked too busy to judge anyone. "You're here to volunteer?" she asked, handing me a clipboard. I nodded. My voice still trembled too much to speak. I started small, sorting donations, arranging supplies, listening to stories of women who had lost homes, husbands, children. Every story was a mirror, reflecting my own pain back at me, but softer now, because here we were all rebuilding. Clara noticed my discipline, my calm. "You must have run a home," she said once while labeling boxes. I smiled faintly. "Yes." And it ran me too. Weeks passed, then months. The woman who once waited by windows started walking with purpose again. I'd wake up early, dress neatly, and walk to the foundation with a quiet determination. It wasn't just about helping others. It was about stitching back the parts of myself that my own family had torn. One evening, after a long day, Clara invited me for tea in her small office. "You know, Norma," she said, "you could do more than just assist here. You understand what these women go through. Maybe you could lead one of our support groups?" I hesitated. The idea of leading felt foreign. But that night, when I lay on my narrow bed, I thought of all the words I had kept locked behind silence. Lessons, pain, patience, forgiveness. Maybe those words were waiting for this very moment to find a home. And so I said yes. The first session was terrifying. My hands shook as I arranged chairs in a circle. 10 women came, all broken in different ways. One by divorce, one by loss, one by a child who forgot her number. I began simply, "Sometimes life doesn't throw us away," I said softly. "It just hides us until we learn to see ourselves again." They listened, really listened. And in their eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Respect. Months turned into a year. The foundation grew, and so did I. Clara made me a permanent coordinator. I learned paperwork, budgets, the rhythm of responsibility. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. Then one morning, Clara approached me with a new idea. She said, "Norma, we're planning to start a new branch, one focused entirely on women rebuilding after family abandonment. I think you should lead it." My heart stopped. All the years of being discarded, erased, silenced, suddenly aligned into something meaningful. I said yes, but only after a long pause, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. We named it the Second Table Foundation. The name came from something I once whispered to myself. If life takes away your seat, build another table. Foundations take money, and money takes vision. So I started writing proposals, reaching out to people, calling in favors. Every day my confidence grew, quietly, humbly, like sunlight creeping through curtains. Then fate stepped in, not with drama, but with timing so perfect it almost felt scripted. One afternoon, while reviewing venue options for our first charity dinner, Clara said, "There's a beautiful estate available just outside the city. Old house, big garden, recently restored. It could be perfect." She handed me the file. I opened it and froze. The photograph showed a 2-story brick house, white porch, maple trees along the driveway. My old home. The same one my family once filled with laughter, and later silence. I stared at it until the image blurred. Clara noticed my stillness. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yes," I whispered. "I know that house." The next week we drove to visit the property. It looked even more beautiful than I remembered, but emptier too. The garden was trimmed, but the flowers seemed unfamiliar, as if they bloomed for someone else's joy. A caretaker greeted us. "The owner's moved abroad," he said. "It's available for lease." I walked through each room slowly, the kitchen where I once cooked, The hallway where I'd waited for apologies that never came. The bedroom where I packed my suitcase one rainy night. The house was quiet but not cruel, just tired, like me. As we stood in the living room, Clara said, "Well, what do you think?" I turned toward the windows where sunlight danced on the floorboards. "I think," I said slowly, "it's time this house heard laughter again." We signed the lease that afternoon. In the weeks that followed, I oversaw every detail: lights, decor, invitations, catering. The event would raise funds for women left behind, women like me. But it was more than an event. It was a return. Every night I stayed late to prepare, walking through those rooms as if reclaiming them with each step. I spoke softly to the walls sometimes, not with bitterness, but with quiet forgiveness. "I'm not the same woman you watched cry," I told them once. "I'm the woman who learned to build." A week before the dinner, Clara called with surprising news. "Norma, you won't believe this," she said. "We've been contacted by a donor family. They'd like to attend the event and make a public contribution. Their name's Jenkins." My heart slowed. My last name. My children. I stood in silence, the phone pressed against my ear. For a moment I thought of saying no, but something deeper within me, the calm that comes only after long storms, whispered otherwise. "Tell them they're welcome," I said. And for the first time in many years, I meant it. That night I sat by my window. Same rain, same sound. Same sky as the night they'd replaced me. But this time I didn't feel erased. I felt ready, ready for whatever the next evening would bring. Not to prove myself, but to let life, in its strange and poetic way, complete its own circle. Have you ever stood face to face with the past and realized it no longer has the power to hurt you? It's strange how life arranges such meetings, not out of cruelty, but to show you what peace really looks like. Thank you for being here again tonight. Before I begin, I'd like to know, where are you listening from this time? And what time is it where you are? Because time has its own way of healing stories like mine. The night of the charity dinner arrived quietly. No thunder, no storm, just a soft drizzle that made everything shimmer. Candles lined the driveway. The same maple trees that once shaded my heartbreak now framed the path of my return. Clara stood by my side, radiant in her calm. Volunteers moved about, arranging flowers and last-minute decorations. Inside the hall, every detail felt familiar. The creak of the floorboards, the echo of voices, the hum of anticipation. As guests began to arrive, I stayed near the back, observing faces and gestures. People from every walk of life, women who had once lost everything and found their way back. Men who'd learned compassion too late but still tried. Then I saw them. My son. Aaron walked in first, older now, lines of responsibility on his face. Behind him came his wife, Melissa, and their teenage daughter, the one I'd never met. For a moment I couldn't breathe. They hadn't seen me yet. Clara was greeting them, explaining the cause, the mission. When she gestured toward me at the far end of the room, Aaron turned and froze. Our eyes met across the hall. It wasn't dramatic. There was no gasp, no scene, just silence. A silence heavy enough to hold every word we'd never said. When I finally walked to the podium to speak, I felt strangely calm. The lights dimmed, and the soft sound of rain outside filled the pauses between heartbeats. "Good evening," I began. "My name is Norma Jenkins. I once believed my worth depended on who needed me, and when no one did, I thought my story had ended. But sometimes what we call an ending is just life, rewriting us quietly." The audience listened and still, intent, connected. Aaron looked down at his hands. Melissa's eyes glistened, though she quickly blinked away the tears. Even their daughter, curious and distant, leaned forward slightly, as if sensing something sacred between the lines. I spoke about the foundation, about rebuilding dignity, about how love isn't ownership, it's presence. And then at the end I added softly, "This house used to be mine once, Tonight it belongs to every woman who ever lost her place at someone else's table. Because now there's room for all of us. The hall erupted in applause. But all I heard was the rain, steady, forgiving, almost like applause from the sky. After the event, people mingled. Laughter returned to the house, gentle, human, healing. Aaron approached me slowly, like someone walking through old photographs. "Mom," he began, his voice breaking on the word. "I didn't think—" I stopped him with a small smile. "You don't have to explain," I said. "We were all doing the best we could. With what we knew then." He nodded, eyes wet. "You turned this place into something beautiful." "I just gave it back its purpose," I replied. "Homes shouldn't hold grudges." Melissa joined us quietly. She looked smaller than I remembered, not in size but in pride. "I owe you an apology," she said softly. "I was afraid of how much space you took in Aaron's life. I thought pushing you away would make our home calmer." I touched her arm gently. Fear makes us do strange things, but forgiveness makes them forgettable. And then their daughter, Lucy, came forward, holding a small booklet from the foundation's table. "Grandma," she said, trying the word for the first time, "can I help at your next event?" That single word, Grandma, felt like the final brick clicking into place. I smiled. "Yes, darling, that's exactly why I built all this." In the weeks that followed, something changed between us. Not loudly, but like dawn spreading across a quiet sky. Aaron visited often, sometimes helping with logistics, sometimes just sitting beside me on the porch, sipping tea. He never tried to explain the past in full, and I never demanded it. Some silences are better left as truce. Melissa began volunteering too, working with Clara in organizing workshops for young mothers. And Lucy, curious, bright, became the foundation's youngest helper. She'd bring her friends, calling it Grandma's second table. Life had circled back, not to punish, but to balance. Months later, as summer began to fade, Clara and I sat outside under the maple trees. The foundation had grown beyond what we'd dreamed. She looked at me and said, "You know, Norma, I think your life taught me something important. That peace doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering differently." I smiled at that. Because she was right. Every corner of that house now held laughter again. The kind that doesn't erase pain, but lives alongside it. The same walls that once heard arguments now echoed with hope. The same kitchen that saw tears now served soup for women who'd found new homes through us. And every evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I'd walk through the rooms, not as the owner, not as the victim, but as the witness of a miracle quietly fulfilled. Aaron eventually asked me to move closer to their home. I said no, kindly. "I belong here now," I told him, "where stories are mended, not rewritten." He understood. Once he sent me a small gift, a framed photo of our family at the charity dinner, laughing, arms around one another. On the back he'd written, "You didn't lose your family, Mom. You just taught it how to come home again." I kept that frame by my bedside. Years later, the foundation became a national program, helping women rebuild after betrayal, loss, or displacement. Clara retired and I named the Central Hall after her. Lucy, all grown up now, took over management. She called it her inheritance of kindness. As for me, I stayed on quietly, attending meetings, walking through the gardens, watering the flowers that lined the old porch. And sometimes, when the rain came, the same kind of rain that once washed me out of my own home, I'd smile to myself and whisper, "You took everything from me once. But you also gave me back everything I truly needed, just in a different form. Because destiny doesn't destroy, it rearranges. And sometimes it brings you back to the same table, not to beg for a seat, but to host the feast."